My name is Maya Santos. I grew up in a narrow brick house on the south side of St. Louis where the hallway always smelled like lemon oil and Eliza Doolittle perfume, my mother's favorites. We were ordinary in the small stubborn way that makes ordinary feel like safety. My mother Evelyn had hands that always seemed to be doing something. Sewing a torn shirt, polishing silver, rearranging my childhood photos so the frames breathed. She had a laugh that could break through any television-washed silence. She kept our lives stitched together with thrift store finds, hot tea, and a stubborn pride so loud it was almost audible. People used to say Evelyn was unlucky in love. She'd smile and say she'd rather be in love with the things that last. Friendship, steady work, memories. That's because the things that lasted were not always people. Her prized possession, the one she would touch with the kind of reverence you reserve for old letters and first edition books, was a small wooden box, her mother's jewelry box. It wasn't flashy. Didn't need to be. Inside were 3 rings, a pair of clipped-on earrings, and a fragile gold locket that held 2 sepia photographs so faded the faces looked like ghosts smiling in sleep. Those rings carried more weight than their metal. They were marked by years, a faint dent where a hammer slipped, a tiny star-shaped chip in the diamond, the initials ELS inside the band. She told me the story every year on my birthday like a ritual, how her mother had hidden them during the hard years, how they had been pawned and bought back and pawned again across Depression-era storefronts and weddings, like a heartbeat that would not stop. They were heirlooms not only because they came from the past but because they were a map of survival. Never sell them, she would say, touching the locket between her fingers. If you ever have to, sell everything else first. But keep these. Promise me. Promised her. I whispered it under a ceiling fan and meant it like a vow. This story isn't about me though. It's about betrayal. About how the people who inherit our stories sometimes treat them like receipts to be cashed. It's about my younger brother Daniel, the golden son of Evelyn Santos. He was 16 when he decided he would be something his mother had only whispered about. A lawyer. He had a jaw like a statue's and a smile that bent strangers into trust. He could make a cashier laugh and turn a parking lot into an audience. Mom bragged about him like a secret recipe, told anyone who'd listen that he would bring honor back to our family name. Santos, carved in the mind of anyone who thought about us at all. Daniel studied. He applied for scholarships, worked nights at a restaurant, and for 2 years sent every extra cent he had back home. When he got into law school, a nice one, not sensational but respectable, Mom cried into her hands and polished the rings until they shone like beacons. For luck, she said, placing them in their box and handing me the key. Hold them safe. We did. We locked them in the top drawer of a bedside table that had been in the family since before my mother was born. We whispered about the future the way people whisper about spring's coming. Cautious, hopeful, full of small plans. Daniel promised to pay Mom back. Not with words but with diplomas and references and later, a partnership plaque that would hang on a wall so polished it would make her rings look cheap by comparison. Years spun out. Daniel left for school with a suitcase and a head full of purpose. Mom went to the hospice twice a week to help an old neighbor. I worked 2 jobs and took night classes that tasted of coffee and determination. We lived in a house that squeaked in the wrong places and taught us how to notice small mercies. We believed in Daniel the way people believe in sunrise. When he called, we listened to his triumphs, and when he complained, we offered solutions small enough to fix the immediate problem but not the enormous hunger that lived in ambition. Then the break. Law school greed turned to law school success. He graduated, clerked for a judge in the city, married a woman named Gina who wore couture and a smile as wide as a billboard. When he landed at a private firm, the calls came less often. When he became partner, everything else got rearranged like furniture in a house where someone had decided the living room should face the street. He called less. He texted more. Busy, he wrote. Client dinners. Big cases. He posted photos his mother could barely recognize. A leather briefcase, a watch that cost more than my management salary, a car that gleamed in sunlight as if it wanted to be admired. But here's the thing about people who build themselves into monuments. The shine doesn't always come from hard work. Sometimes it comes from the mortar you steal from those who trust you. I was on the phone with Mom the week Daniel announced his partnership. She was clipping coupons like it was a sport, and her voice had that motherly pride that swelled until it might lift the roof. Your brother is a partner, can you believe it? she said, and then added quieter. He's so proud. He cried, Maya. He cried and said he'd finally make us proud. We raised glasses over the phone. We toasted to the future. We imagined a new kitchen for Mom, painted white with a little island, her rings polished and displayed in their little wooden box. We imagined Sundays with better coffee. We imagined a life where no one pawned jewelry out of desperation because there would be money now, there would be respect now. That's what partnership meant to us. It meant safety. 2 weeks after we toasted, 2 ordinary, unremarkable weeks, Mom called me into her room. She had been sorting the locket, the rings, the clipped-on earrings, arranging and rearranging like a woman trying to solve a riddle only she had the key to. When she opened the box, I felt the air leave my lungs. One ring was gone. Not misplaced. Not buried in the folds of a blouse. Gone. Maybe I put it somewhere else, she said, but even she didn't believe it. She looked at me with the look a sailor gives a sea that suddenly looks taller. Her hands shook, and when they did, I saw all the years in them, the years of work, of paying rent on time, of patching a childhood's torn sweater with love, and suddenly that small wooden box felt like a ledger with a thief's signature. How many? I asked, because the question itself seemed to measure something we were not ready to measure. 1, she said. Only 1. She checked her jewelry box, checked the pockets of every coat in the closet, empty drawers like a woman unearthing memories. Nothing. We called Daniel. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting for a cue. Hey Maya. What's up? Mom's voice wavered. Daniel, one of the rings is missing. There was a pause. It was a pause that sounded like someone measuring their words with a ruler. Lost, he said. Lost, Mom said. I don't know. I swear it was here. You looked everywhere, he asked. He sounded concerned, like a candle of worry. He promised to be home in a week, said he'd help look. He told Mom he loved her. He promised to call. Then he said it again. I don't know how something would go missing, Ma. That night I slept like someone who thinks an alarm clock will wake them if anything goes wrong. In the morning, the missing ring had turned from a small theft into an ache. Mom couldn't cook properly because the ring had been her talisman. She couldn't fold a towel without pausing to look at the box. She would reach for the locket and then close her hand as if she'd been punished for reaching. Weeks passed. Daniel's partnership party came and went. He sent pictures of himself with a glass, smiling, his arm pressed around his wife. Mom watched the photos like someone watching a weather report. She could see the storm, but she could not hear it. I tried to be patient. I tried to imagine forgetfulness, absent-mindedness, every small neutral explanation before the worst one. Then the truth arrived like a stranger at the front door. The neighbor's kid, Luis, came by on a Tuesday afternoon. He was irritable and honest in the way teenagers are when they've had too much soda and not enough daylight. Miss Evelyn, he said, looking at Mom like he had a crust of responsibility on his tongue. You remember when your son sold stuff? What? Mom said. Her hands clutched the table like a person trying to hold onto a ship. Yeah, somebody said he sold some things. Got a car, someone said. He looked at me when he said it like the confession needed an extra witness. A sports car. You know which one. I felt the floor tilt and then split. A sports car, the same glossy one in Daniel's Instagram feed, and a ring gone. My mother, who had walked through ration lines and funeral parlors and the slow weathering of poverty, who had kept that wooden box as if it were a last prayer, looked at the concrete like you look at something you suddenly realize has betrayed you. I called Daniel. He answered right away. Maya? Everything okay? Did you sell any of Mom's jewelry? I said. The words came out faster than I expected. A staccato of accusation that needed to touch his ears first. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a stammering attempt to cover. A laugh like a man who'd practiced denial on a stage. What? No. Maya, what kind of question is that? You were seen with a new car. A neighbor thinks something was sold. Mom's ring is missing. Another pause. Longer this time. And then, I didn't sell anything, Mom. I mean, I wouldn't. We need to stop being paranoid. Stop being paranoid? Mom has a ring missing that's worth more than a night out, and you call this paranoid? I heard my voice break like glass. He said, listen, things are complicated. There are things you don't know about. But I didn't take her ring. He sounded like a man who needed a script to breathe. Then he said the thing that would lodge in my mind like a splinter. We all make sacrifices to get ahead, Maya. You'd understand if you were here. That sentence was heavy with something I had not expected. Entitlement. It reeked of a ledger where love was a number to be spent. It suggested that success had an authorization form and he, Daniel, had stamped it with our mother's name. I tried to believe him. I wanted to. But that night, I drove downtown to the firm where he worked and I did what the ordinary do when the extraordinary knocks. I watched. I sat far enough for the lamps to blur his face. I watched the car park, the way it glinted under sodium lights, the way he slid his hand across that glossy hood as if caressing a lover. I watched him walk into the building with a woman whose laugh was a currency and whose shoes seemed to declare bankruptcy for the sidewalk. When Daniel texted me a photo of the partnership plaque, his name on a brass plate, his face pressed to the camera, I couldn't breathe. The plaque looked small and obscene, and in that smallness, the missing ring became a proof of everything that had been missing all along. Gratitude, honesty, a basic sense of stewardship. There are moments in life when something acts like a bell. A bell rings once and a lifetime changes course. The missing ring was a bell. Not loud, not flashy, but clear. For me, the bell sounded not like revenge at first, but like a question. What do you do when the person you trusted for proof of yourself trades your mother's history for a lap of horsepower? You might think revenge is the first word that comes to mind. For me, the first word was protection. Protect the memory. Protect the locket. Protect the pieces of mom that hadn't yet been pawned. But protecting often breeds anger. Anger becomes a fuel and fuel becomes a plan. So I started keeping notes. I kept them at first like a child making a list of birds, innocent, detached, cataloging. Names, dates, small details. A picture Daniel had posted. A comment he'd made. The price of a car like the one he'd bought. The number of nights he had not called. I saved everything, thinking that if I buried suspicion under paper, it might not explode. But suspicion in my house wasn't something you could bury. It turned into a patient, slow fire that would not leave us alone. And I found allies in the most unlikely places. Gina's sister liked Daniel's photos publicly. A junior associate at the firm mentioned a weekend road trip. A friend of a friend said Daniel had been seen pawning things to cover a debt. Someone said, "Is how gossip always begins." Pieces slid into place like a jigsaw puzzle you didn't want to finish. Another ring missing. Another quiet omission. A pattern starting to look more like intent than accident. If you're still with me, hit that like button and subscribe. We're just getting to the part where the walls start having ears. If you're not, pause the video, promise you'll come back at the cliffhanger because I'm going to tell you what I did next and trust me, it will change how you think about family. One more thing before I close this section, because suspense is cruel and I love to be cruel. Daniel called me the night before he proposed a trip, a celebratory thing he said, and he told me he'd be by the house at 9. I told Mom and she smiled the way you smile when you let a dream pass over your head like a shadow. She put the wooden box on the dresser and locked the drawer. At 8:56 p.m. the knock came. Daniel was standing at the door, hair perfect, grin practiced. He kissed Mom's cheek and asked about old photographs and then, so casually it could have been a joke, he reached over to the top drawer, opened it and closed it again as though testing a Windows latch. He said, "The old rings are beautiful, Ma." Mom blushed like a girl at the prom. "Thank you, baby." He leaned close to Mom and said, "You know, sometimes it's better to let things go. For new beginnings." That sentence should have been nothing. For Mom and for me it was everything. He didn't take anything that night. Not then. But his breath smelled like cologne and something sweeter, lemon oil and the idea of a future he had already bought. When he left, Mom waved and went back to the dresser and opened the drawer and found something strange on the bottom. A note folded in half. I had slipped a scrap of paper under the drawer before he arrived. It read simply, "Watch him." The note I slipped under Mom's drawer was small, just a scrap of paper with 3 words. Watch him. I thought it might be paranoia. I hoped it was. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's smile the night before had been rehearsed, that every step he took in our house was measured. And when a person measures everything in their own favor, the truth becomes a weapon. I decided to start quietly, cautiously. If I approached him head-on, he'd lie, and the lie would sound like gospel. The truth had to be observed. I started by following his social media, piecing together patterns. Not stalking, I told myself, detective work. I noticed the small things. A pair of sunglasses in his photos that Mom didn't own, a bracelet that looked expensive, and the way his wife, Gina, seemed uncomfortable when Daniel mentioned family plans. She never laughed at my mother's jokes in the photos he shared. That's when the first suspicion solidified. There was more than just ambition in Daniel's life. There was deceit. The first concrete clue came from a local pawn shop. I drove there on a Saturday morning under the pretense of running errands. The clerk remembered him. He remembered Daniel selling some stuff, he said, shaking his head. I pressed, feigning casual curiosity. What stuff? Jewelry mostly, he said. A few rings, gold and diamond. I asked if he could remember details, brands, sizes, anything, and he glanced around before whispering. One was a small gold ring with initials inside, I think. Yes. My heart stopped. My mother's initials. I didn't buy anything yet. I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel until the leather ached, replaying every memory of Daniel with Mom. Every hug, every shared laugh, every promise made and broken. That's when I realized. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was calculated. He had taken the rings, her heirlooms, and traded them for a sports car. I tried calling him. Hey Daniel, can we talk about something? I said. Sure, Maya. What's up? His tone was casual, a little too calm. Mom's jewelry, the rings. Did you? I trailed off, hoping, praying, imagining the impossible. Look, Maya, I don't know what you've heard, but you've got to stop spinning stories, he said, his voice hardening. I didn't take anything from Mom. His denial was sharp, rehearsed, like he had practiced it in front of a mirror. But I knew. I had proof in my head, even if I couldn't show it yet. Then came the late-night texts. I had set up an email address under a fake name to communicate with people who might have seen Daniel. One night, I received a message from someone calling themselves AJ. If you want your brother's secret, meet me at the corner of Market and 7th Midnight. Midnight. Perfectly cinematic, terrifying, and yet irresistible. I drove there, my hands shaking, gripping the wheel like I was bracing for a storm. When I arrived, a hooded figure emerged from the shadows. You Maya? The figure asked. Yes, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I know what he's done, AJ said. I see him all the time. The rings, they're gone. He sold them. Every last piece. I felt a cold rage pulse through me. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you look like the only one who'll do anything about it. Everyone else? They just let it slide. You want proof. He handed me a folder. Photographs, receipts, small notes from pawn shops. The evidence I had feared, yet also the ammunition I needed. Daniel's handwriting appeared in one of the receipts. Gold ring sold $5,200. Sports car fund. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt the slow, suffocating weight of betrayal. Then I saw another layer of deceit, the affair. Started with the photos. A cafe picture of Daniel with a woman I didn't recognize, too close for a friend. Then the messages AJ had collected. Flirtations, secret dinners, hotel check-ins. Gina knew nothing, Mom knew nothing, and here was my brother, lying through the shiny grin he gave every family member. And just like that, the betrayal became personal. He hadn't just taken jewelry. He had stolen trust, manipulated love, and hidden his lies in the warm glow of family pride. I drove home, hands shaking, not from fear but from clarity. Every smile Daniel had offered was a mask. Every hug was a transaction. Every promise gone. I knew revenge would come. But first, I had to understand the man who betrayed us, the brother I had trusted. I started cataloging everything. His habits, his friends, his enemies, the people he deceived. It became an obsession. And as it often does, obsession becomes plan. Mom didn't know yet. I had to protect her, shield her from the worst until the right moment. Because when Daniel's time of reckoning came, it wouldn't be messy. It would be precise. And here's the kicker. He never suspected me. That's the beauty of betrayal. It makes people careless. They think they're untouchable, that the past can be pawned and forgotten. I spent that first night after discovering Daniel's betrayal pacing my room. The folder AJ had given me sat on the desk, a silent witness to everything my brother had done. I stared at the receipts, photographs, and messages, trying to make sense of it all. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a rage so sharp it felt like it could slice through steel. I thought about Mom. She had sacrificed everything for Daniel. Her time, her love, her jewelry. She had believed in him the way only a mother can. And he had sold that trust for a car and secret dinners with someone else. I couldn't let her know yet. She couldn't handle the truth. Not now. I needed a plan. I started with surveillance. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew that knowledge was power. I watched him for weeks, noting his routines, his favorite restaurants, the cafes he frequented with clients, and more importantly, the woman he was seeing behind Gina's back. Every picture he posted, every story he shared, every casual boast, all of it became data. Sleep became a stranger. I worked in silence, compiling every scrap of evidence into folders, spreadsheets, and sticky notes plastered across my walls. Each note had a code. D1 for Daniel, R1 for the ring, H1 for hotel receipts, C1 for cash transactions. By the time the week ended, my bedroom looked like a detective's war room. Maps, addresses, and photos hung like battle plans. And the emotional toll was heavier than I expected. I cried in the shower, screamed into my pillow, and at times I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from realizing the world has no idea the storm brewing in one quiet room. Every memory of Daniel's smile became a knife. Every time Mom asked if he had called, I lied, saying he was busy, ignoring the truth like a dangerous secret. The worst nights were when I replayed his words in my head. We all make sacrifices to get ahead, Maya. You'd understand if you were here. That sentence haunted me. Sacrifices. He didn't see the rings, the trust, the love, he only saw currency. And now I decided it was my turn to make sacrifices too. My normal life, my sleep, my peace, all gone, all for one goal. To make Daniel feel the weight of betrayal he had inflicted on us. I had to be strategic. I couldn't just lash out. This had to be precise. Step 1, isolate. I had to make sure Daniel couldn't cover his tracks. I dug into his finances, looking for gaps, expenses that didn't add up. I tracked the pawn shops he visited through the receipts AJ had provided. Slowly a web emerged. Each thread a lie, each note a secret. Step 2, manipulate. I started planting seeds of doubt around him. A text from a friend about suspicious activity. A vague warning that someone was asking questions. I didn't lie exactly. I just nudged reality in the right direction. Daniel's world, built on lies and arrogance, began to crack. Step 3, gather allies. I contacted AJ again. He wasn't the only one who had seen Daniel's schemes. Another former associate of Daniel's, someone who had been quietly wronged, agreed to provide information. Together, we began to map out a plan that could expose every deception. But planning revenge isn't just about logistics. It's about understanding the person. Daniel thrived on appearances, on respect, on admiration. Strip that away and he becomes vulnerable. That became my strategy. Not physical harm, not threats, humiliation, exposure, and the truth. One night I sat in Mom's kitchen holding the locket, staring at the initials inside the ring that was still missing. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but my mind was calm. The calm of a storm that knows exactly when to strike. I whispered to the empty room. You think you can steal from Mom, from us, and nothing will happen? Watch me. From that night on, everything changed. I started timing his movements, noting when he left the office, when he came home, when Gina was away. I even recorded conversations carefully, legally, enough to use them as leverage. I also began small psychological maneuvers. Anonymous messages to his phone. People notice things. Mysterious emails from untraceable accounts, hinting that someone knew about the rings, about the affair. Each message was a seed, planted in his mind, slowly growing into paranoia. And then came the twist I hadn't expected. Daniel became reckless. The more I nudged, the more careless he got. He started leaving the hotel receipts out, forgetting messages, posting bragging photos with the rings he still hadn't pawned entirely. Every small misstep was another piece of evidence, another weapon in my arsenal. At this point I had to ask myself, how far am I willing to go? Revenge is a dangerous game. One mistake, one slip, and I would be the one exposed, the one consumed. But the thought of Mom, of those stolen rings and the betrayal, it fueled me. I created scenarios in my head, multiple layers of retaliation. Public exposure? Check. Financial sabotage? Check. Emotional humiliation? Check. I imagined him at a dinner party, his friends noticing, his wife realizing, and his reputation crumbling. Every layer had a psychological impact designed to hurt him in the ways he had hurt us. By now, I had also started documenting everything. Every plan, every observation, every lie he had told. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about setting the record straight. If nothing else, I had to ensure that the truth existed somewhere, untouchable and undeniable. And then the hardest part, patience. Waiting. Watching. Knowing that Daniel would make mistakes. That he would slip. That arrogance, his greatest strength, was also his fatal flaw. I spent nights alone, thinking about the first time Mom held me and Daniel in her arms, her eyes full of hope. I imagined her face when she finally saw justice done. Not the rings returned, not even Daniel punished, but the satisfaction of seeing betrayal confronted. That thought became my guiding light. You ever notice how people who build lives on glass think they're unbreakable? They don't understand that glass can cut. Daniel didn't. That was his problem. By the time I moved to action, everything was mapped. The receipts, the photos, the messages. A constellation that drew his path from the kitchen table in a small St. Louis house to the gleaming leather seats of a sports car. But plans are only as good as their execution. So I layered mine. I wanted humiliation with the precision of a surgeon and the inevitability of a season changing. First move, credibility. People believe numbers more than they believe feelings. So I found a quiet, reliable way to make the evidence undeniable without handing anyone a script on how to destroy a person. I compiled a dossier, neat, stapled, clean, with dated receipts from pawn shops, photographs of the pawn jewelry tags, copies of his social media where the car gleamed, and a timeline that showed when the rings disappeared and when the expensive purchases were made. I made 2 copies, one for the world, one for me. But I wasn't going to march into the firm with a folder and shout. People like Daniel are practiced at hiding. He had honed the art of deflection in courtrooms and cocktail parties. He knew how to smile his way through a scandal. So I needed more than facts, I needed optics. I needed a stage. I picked the firm's annual gala. It was the kind of event where partners wore their arrogance like jewelry and platitudes were served with champagne. Daniel loved it. The applause, the photos, the slow motion of admiration. He would stand on stage under lights, and people would look at him and nod and call him a success. If anyone could be brought to heel in front of an audience, it would be him. Getting in wasn't the problem. I had a ticket. A client of mine, the charity the firm sponsored, had an extra and no one asked how I had it. What mattered was placement. I needed him to look up from his brass plaque and see a face he couldn't ignore. Our mother's face, or at least the idea of her, and then watch as everything he had bought with stolen histories collapsed. So I engineered it. Carefully. I arranged for the former pawnshop clerk, the one who'd recognized the initials, to be at the event as a volunteer. He agreed because he wanted what we all wanted, a little righting of wrongs. I sent an anonymous tip to a local blogger who covered legal scandals and civic gossip. I hinted that something about a partner's ethics might be interesting. The blogger was hungry for an angle. The night of the gala, Daniel arrived in his suit. His smile turned up to 11. He posed for photos. He drank the right drinks at the right times. He basked in the sound of polite applause when newer partners were called to the stage. He didn't notice the woman with the camera in the crowd, the blogger, until it was too late. I watched from the back. Beside me, the pawnshop clerk looked smaller than I imagined, like a man bearing the burden of having seen a rusted truth. He clutched a paper in his hand. Proof, a receipt with the initials. I felt my throat tighten. This was the moment patience had been preparing me for. When the firm's senior partner started his speech, he praised Daniel's commitment to excellence. Daniel smiled. The lights haloed his head. Then the blogger stood up, cleared her throat, and asked a question, sharp enough to cut through the scripted praise. "Mr. Calder," she said loudly, addressing the senior partner, "we've been hearing a lot about integrity in the firm this year. Is your office prepared to address allegations about a recently promoted partner and questionable personal purchases tied to pawn family heirlooms?" You could have heard a pin drop. Daniel's smile faltered for a fraction of a second and then came back stronger, practiced. He laughed it off, made a joke about rumors and hype, and the crowd chuckled politely, nervous. But then the pawnshop clerk stepped forward, surprising everyone. He had waited his whole life for a truth like this. He produced the receipt with the initials ELS and placed it on the table in plain sight. There was a murmur. One of the senior partners' faces went white. The blogger's camera lights blinked like fireflies. Gina's expression shifted, an almost imperceptible flicker that said in one breath, "I didn't know." Daniel's jaw clenched the way a man clenching a secret might. He tried to laugh it off, to turn it into a joke. "This is ridiculous," he began, but his voice had an edge I'd never heard before. The firm's PR director took the microphone and tried to steer the narrative toward ongoing internal review. But the seed had been planted. An accusation, when placed in front of a crowd, takes on a life of its own. I left before the commotion truly erupted. I needed to be far enough away to watch the dominoes fall, but close enough to catch the sound of them. I drove home in a fog of adrenaline, my hands numb with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The second layer of my plan targeted Gina. Not because she warranted punishment, she didn't. She deserved compassion, probably more than anyone in that room. But Gina was part emotional collateral, and part necessary audience for the unveiling of truth. She needed to see it from a source that couldn't be dismissed as petty family drama. I sent her a neutral, factual email that night, one that made it impossible for her to pretend ignorance. I laid out dates, receipts, and photos stripped of rhetoric. I didn't plead. I didn't enjoy the moment. I knew better than to gloat in an email. I wanted clarity to be offered before the first gossip could twist it. Her reply came the next morning. Short, stunned, and practical. "I need time." She asked for no details, no confrontation. She needed alone time to process. She deserved it. Meanwhile, Daniel's arrogance couldn't be contained. He reached out to me, then to Mom, in a flurry of apologies he'd practiced. He claimed a loan, bad advice, pressure from associates. But the receipts didn't lie. The receipts showed he had sold a ring with her initials and used part of that money on a deposit for the car. He had written on the record, "Sports Car Fund." The ledger was clear. The moral ledger? Messy, but the public one leaned in my favor. But I didn't want him merely embarrassed. That would be too small. I wanted him incapacitated in the one currency he worshipped, reputation. So I pulled the next trick, client exposure. Lawyers live by trust. Clients expect discretion and fidelity. If their partner, a man who advertised himself as someone who guarded people's secrets, was exposed as a petty thief of his own family's history, the clients would not be patient. I reached out anonymously to a handful of clients Daniel had recently impressed. I provided the same clean dossier, framed not as revenge but as a consumer advisory. You might want to know who you're trusting with your legal affairs. No threats, just truth. The effect was surgical. One by one, clients withdrew their cases, called for second opinions, and requested reassignment. The firm's leadership, previously wrapped in warm rhetoric about mentorship and integrity, found themselves forced to act. A partner whose name had been on plaques and plaques was suddenly a risk. Daniel's partner status was put under review. It was functional. It was corporate. It was the kind of slow-moving consequence that strips a man of the things he enjoys the most: influence, admiration, power. I watched from a distance as the life he had built around his shiny purchases started to flake away. But the revenge wasn't done. You can strip a man of reputation and still leave him with the car and the options to buy himself back. So I aimed at the money. I contacted the dealership where he'd bought the sports car. I didn't lie. I merely asked a series of neutral questions about ownership transfers and whether a bank had placed a lien. It turns out Daniel had financed a portion through a personal loan and used a private line of credit. When the firm froze his partner benefits and clients dropped away, his cash flow dipped. The bank sent an automated notice. The dealership, eager to protect itself, moved to repossess the vehicle. That day, I drove by the house just as the tow truck pulled up. Daniel had come outside in his slippers, his eyes red, his hands empty. The tow driver loaded the car and drove away like a funeral procession. For the first time, I saw him not as the confident brother who had sold his mother's history for chrome and rubber, but as a man with a hole in his chest where pride used to be. If you're still here, if your nails are bitten and your jaw clenched, hit that like button and subscribe. Because I'm not done. The best part was yet to come. The final move was psychological theater. A staged discovery that would cause the maximum internal collapse. I reached out to the woman Daniel had been seeing, the one whose laughter had been a currency. I didn't want to ruin her. I wanted truth. She agreed to meet me after some coaxing, and when she arrived at the cafe, she looked as exhausted as someone carrying a secret too long. Why him? I asked her bluntly. Why sell heirlooms for him? She looked at me like someone who had finally been handed a match. He told me he needed it. He said it was temporary. He said it would be for better things for his family. I thought I was helping him. I didn't know. Her eyes were glassy. I believed her. I told her the plan. To let the truth come to Gina from a third party she trusted. She agreed to meet Gina under the pretense of a friendly lunch and to let the receipts speak. She was scared, but she saw the unfairness in both being used and being silent. On the day they met, Gina sat across from the woman, a paper cup of coffee untouched. The woman placed the receipts and the hotel bookings, and the timeline between them like someone laying out puzzle pieces for a family portrait. Gina's face sank. The two women stared at each other for a long, terrible minute, then at Daniel's text that glowed on the screen like confessions. Gina left before the coffee went cold. She left with the dignity of someone who had been betrayed but refused to be reduced to outrage. She did not shout. She did not call Daniel. She walked away. The final blow, the one I had saved like a final note in a symphony, came from Mom. I wanted her in the room when Daniel touched the bottom of what he had done, but not because I wanted her to shame him. I wanted her to have the last word. So I invited him over under the pretense of family dinner, and while he did not know it, the local blogger would be there, invisible in the background, and Gina had already been given a quiet note saying if you want to come, you should. He arrived in a different way than before. Less swagger, more calculation. He kissed my mother's cheek and acted as if nothing had changed. Mom, who had felt it inside her like a splinter, kept her hands steady. At dinner, she placed the wooden box on the table, closed, as if it were a book she might open for a story. Then she spoke. Daniel, she said, in a voice that was soft but had the iron of someone who'd carried storms. Do you know what these rings mean? He looked at her and he fumbled. He reached for the easy answers, the practiced evasions. He started with a denial, then stumbled into an apology. He spoke about pressure, how the world demanded things from him, how he had made choices that he now regretted. Mom listened. Then she opened the box. Inside there were 2 rings, the locket, and a small scrap of paper, the note I had left months ago. Watch him. The blogger, who had been told the dinner was a small human interest piece, took a soft, careful photograph. Gina, who had been sitting across the room, watched his face collapse like a weathered wall. Mom's final words were simple, and they landed like a verdict. You promised me those would stay in the family. You promised me you would never sell them. Daniel's apology dissolved into murmurs. He reached across the table as if to take a ring, but Mom's hand was steady. You have taken what was not yours, she said. Not money. Not a car. You took the map of our lives. You sold the story that kept us together. He tried to say something, but the words wouldn't form. The blogger clicked a photo. The photograph later ran on the local site with a headline that didn't need to be cruel. Partner under review after family heirlooms traced to pawn shops. The firm issued a statement. The firm froze privileges. The clients called. The tow truck took the car. Gina filed for a separation. Daniel's name, once printed like gold on a plaque, became a line item in an ethics review. I had wanted him to understand the weight of what he had stolen. Maybe he did. Maybe he would spend the rest of his life trying to bargain for it back. But my purpose wasn't total destruction for the sake of cruelty. It was justice in the sense that people who weaponize trust learn that the currency is fragile, it can be seized. A week later I found the missing ring. Not in a pawn shop, not in a vault, but tucked in an envelope inside a charity box at the firm. Someone, perhaps out of conscience, had donated it anonymously with a note, "Returned to Evelyn Santos." The clerk at the charity recognized the jewelry and called me. I drove there and held it in my hand, the small dent in the band, the initials inside, and all the history that came with it. When I gave it back to Mom, she didn't yell or cry. She sat at the kitchen table and traced the initials with her thumb, like someone reading the names of people who have shaped her. "It's back," she said, as if the world was stitched again. She hugged me the way a woman hugs a future she's been promised. But here's the thing about revenge. It's a complex cure. It doesn't fix everything. The car was gone. The partnership was on ice. Gina had left. Mom had the ring but not the years that had been sold. Daniel had lost the shine, but he still had a life to live. He still had to look at himself in the mirror. For some people, that's worse than any public scorn. After the gala, after the tow trucks, after the clients withdrew, Daniel's life had changed, but not in ways that were immediately visible. No one chased him down the street or put him in handcuffs. No one made a public scene except for the evidence, the receipts, the photos, the people he had underestimated. The world around him had quietly shifted. I visited him a week later. He sat on the couch in the apartment he still owned, surrounded by furniture that seemed too large for his smaller, humbled presence. He looked like a man who had woken up inside someone else's life, polished, shiny but hollow. "You did all this," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. "I did what I had to," I replied. "You sold more than rings. You sold trust, family, and honor. And you forgot something important. Mom's history isn't yours to pawn." He stared at me, eyes heavy, but there was nothing left to say. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to punish further. The combination of public exposure, financial consequences, and personal loss had done what words could not. He felt it. Mom, on the other hand, recovered slowly. The ring was back in her hands, but the locket still held the weight of the years she had devoted to raising Daniel. She didn't dwell on anger. She kept the jewelry in a safe place, showing it only to me, sometimes smiling quietly as if we had finally finished a chapter we didn't think we'd survive. "History belongs to the ones who respect it," she said one afternoon, brushing dust from the wooden box. "It isn't about revenge. It's about memory and honor." That lesson stayed with me. Revenge had been a tool, but the real victory was restoring the balance of truth and protecting the story that mattered. Daniel had lost the shine, yes, but he had gained something more difficult, the mirror. He would now live with the reflection of his choices. Over the next months, I watched him rebuild, humbly, quietly, without the arrogance that had once defined him. He reached out occasionally, but never to manipulate, only to apologize. I listened, but I didn't forgive lightly. Forgiveness isn't always the point. Sometimes the point is ensuring that lessons are learned and that history isn't repeated. The moral of this story is simple, yet profound. Trust is fragile and betrayal has a cost. No amount of ambition justifies breaking the sacred bonds of family. And sometimes the most powerful justice isn't violent or loud. It's precise, it's inevitable, and it leaves the guilty with only themselves to confront. As for me, I returned to ordinary life. Mom and I shared quiet mornings, polishing the rings and locket, telling stories of the past that no one could buy or sell. And sometimes late at night I would think of Daniel and smile faintly. Not because I wished him ill, but because justice, subtle and relentless, had done its work. If you're still watching, remember this. Protect your history, honor your family, and never underestimate the quiet ones, the ones who watch, who remember, and who act when the time is right. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, hit the like button, subscribe for more dramatic tales, and share this with someone who loves a good twist. And remember, sometimes the past is more powerful than the present and karma. Well, karma always has its way.